So here we have our EM visualizer GUI from before, and I'm just going to run through and add some new interface features in addition to what we have already. What I want to add is the interface item called a button group. Okay, so if I just click on the object in the toolbar to the left, and I'm just going to drag the button group down like this. Okay, so what the button group does, unlike the sliders and the edit boxes, which take numeric input, or you slide the slider to get a numeric value between the minimum and the maximum that you set in the properties. The button group instead is involved with things like push buttons and radio buttons. So if I just click on the radio button, and if you notice how if I drag the crosshair down to the button group, see how the button group box highlights? Okay, that means the button group is trying to associate itself with this object that you want to place, and that's exactly what we want. So if I add another one to the button group, if I just make this a little bigger so it fits in nice and evenly. If I just align these guys, you want to align them horizontally. Okay. Alright, so if I save that now, so we now have a button group with two radio buttons. Now what these basically do are that the radio buttons are either on or off, okay? And you can have as many of these radio buttons as you want, but by putting it in a button group, this allows the button group to act as a kind of a parent to the buttons that are inside of the group. So it helps control the way the individual radio buttons, or you can have toggle buttons as well, the way the buttons interact with each other. So basically what this does is it turns one on and it turns the rest off. And this is exactly what we want in reality when you compare other GUIs that you use. So we turn something on, we turn the rest off. So we only concentrate on one of the buttons at a time. And this is how the button group helps us do that. So to start off, I'm just going to hop in and edit some of the properties, okay? So the button group. Now, what I want to do is I want to have two radio buttons, one for the electric field plot and one for the magnetic field plot. Now what I want to do is, instead of having both plots on there taking up space, I just want to have one single plot instead, and I can switch between them, switch between the electric and the magnetic plots as I so choose. And I want to do that with radio buttons. So I'm going to call this plot selection, and notice how the title has updated here, okay? The tag I'm going to call plot buttons, okay? The units are normalized, so they resize between 0 and 100% of the size of the figure window, okay? And now I think that's about all we need to change. Now let's look at each of these buttons. Okay, so it's a radio button. We want the string on the radio button to display electric plot. Let's call this E_button. So this is the tag. Remember, the tag is one of the most important properties of the object. Our GUI figures are the parent. Okay, so the whole thing is a GUI figure, and within that figure there are objects, and within the objects there are properties. Okay. So the property is the tag, and the value, you'll notice, is 1. Okay, so that's the default value. And if you notice the callback, if I click here, it says the button group is managed by, actually, hang on, the button group manages the callback of the individual button, okay? And that's exactly what we want. So we have one set of callbacks that govern the entire set of buttons, no matter how many we have, 2 or 3 or 100 buttons, and we have a single callback that we edit, okay? That's an efficient outcome, and it's simpler for us to do, okay? Now let's just consider the second one. We want it to say magnetic plot, and the tag can be H underscore plot is the plot we want button. Okay, now notice the value here is 0. So while this one is on, this one is off, okay? And as I said before, our idea of this is we want our plots to be interchangeable. Okay, so I'm just going to place them over one another and just center it there, okay? Now, seeing as we have two objects overlapping each other and we're going to be choosing between each one, okay, we need to figure out the process in which only one will be displayed. So if we check the properties of this guy, we can see that the visible property is on. I'm going to turn it off, okay? And I'm going to right click here and send it to back, okay? So what I have now is the electric plot is by default on. I want to turn that off. So visibility is V, so that's off. Okay, but so they're both off at the start. Okay, and keep in mind that because they're overlapping, we're restricted in a sense in that before I sent the H plot back. Okay, but now that infers that the E plot is now brought in front. And it's going to give us some trouble, which we'll address further down the track. But just keep that in mind, okay? So let's just have a look now at our GUI. So there's nothing there. But if we do it now, it comes up and it's doing its thing. But obviously we haven't done anything for these, so they won't do anything. But notice how only the electric field one is displayed. But we still have some information displaying from the magnetic field plot, okay? So we need to tidy this up. And the way we do it is by putting in our callback for our button group. To do that, I'm just going to, didn't mean to do that, I'm just going to right click on my button group. I'm going to, it comes off the screen. So if I just, actually what I'll do, move these fellas down, making sure that they overlap. Okay, I'm just going to drag this bad boy up here. Okay, now if I right click here, that's a bit easier to see. I'll right click here, view callbacks. Now see how there's one that says selection change function. That's the callback that we want for the button group. So let's click on that now. So now we're back in our MATLAB code editor. Everything is the same as before for our GUI, but now there's a new callback that has been added. Okay. So let's have a look at the generated code, okay? As with all the other callbacks, it's the handle to the actual object we're dealing with, and that's the button group. And then there's some event data and the handles structure that's passed in between every object, and that's where I've been storing all my data, okay? Now, let's look at event data. It says there's event name, you don't really care, old value, new value, okay? So these are the handles to the selected objects. Okay, so let's think about that. If we go handles, event data dot new value, that's going to give us the handle of the currently selected object. Okay, how can we use that to make a decision based on the button we've selected? What I want to do is I want to use the get command. So I've got the handle now, and I'm going to look for the value. I want the value. Okay. Now, why do I want the value? If I look at the individual, because remember the get command I just wrote gets the callback, gets the handle, sorry, to the button. And now it's the value that we want. Okay. So now, if we just look at the code, it's going to give us the value. Okay. So what we can do is we can use the value of the new object. Okay. I want to use a switch statement so that I can make a decision based on the two discrete buttons that I have. Okay. Actually, let's think about it for a moment. What is the unique identifier for each object that we have in our set of GUIs? Okay. It's the tag. So if I want to find out exactly which button has been selected, I want to look at the tag. So if I compare the tag of the currently selected button, if I compare that to, say, E button or H button, okay, that's going to tell us that, okay, if this is the case, then the current object that's been selected is the E button. Likewise, if this is the case, it's the H button. Okay. So to test this, I'm just going to put in some short little display things, and don't want to go there yet. Let's just run it, and let's just select these. So I selected magnetic plot. I should see a 2. I should see a 1. I should see a 2. Let's look at the thing. 2, 1, 2. Okay. So this is working. All right. So now I can start to enter the code I want. So what I want to do is, if I've selected the E button, I want to set the visibility visible to on if I've selected the electric field button. Likewise, I want to set the magnetic field one to be off. Okay. Now, what I want to do is the exact reverse in the case of the magnetic field. So if I turn this guy off, turn that guy on. Okay. And what I'm going to do is introduce a flag. So this is just a true or false variable. It's going to tell me which button I've selected. Okay. So if I've updated the handles structure, remember I need to use this little piece of code at the end of my function, okay, so that this change gets updated. Okay. Now let's have a look at this. Okay. So notice how when I do this, only the electric field one is getting updated. So what I need to do is I need to tell, using the flag, I need to tell each of the functions to only plot the graph that we want, okay? So I'm just going to edit this one. So let's consider if handles.flag is true, so if it's not 0, else, so if it's 0, that will be 1, and will be in the true case, and this code will be executed, which means we want the electric field, otherwise we plot the magnetic field, okay? And we need an AND statement. So now I'm just going to do it the dodgy way and copy this repeatedly over to my callbacks. And now the smart way to do this, which I encourage you to do, and eliminates a lot of legwork by changing each and every callback, okay, would be to have a common callback function that you define at the bottom of your GUI code, so that you only need to change it once. Now can you see how much easier that would have been if I'd done it, okay? So that's just a bit of a lesson that you need to pick up along the way. So, and then what I'm going to do now is, actually before I do it, let's see the result of this. So if I close the figure, I like to just close it before I run it again. Close it. So now we've got a plot. Let's do something. Okay. But notice how the electric plot is still there. Okay, that's a bit of a pain for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to force, it's because of the problem of the electric field plot being in front of the magnetic field plot. So even though it's been set to have visibility of off, there's still something there on the figure. So handles.eplot, I'm just going to do a dodgy workaround and plot 0, 0, so there's no data at all. Okay, now what I'm going to do now is just copy this section of code so that in addition to executing the code every time we change something, every time we click on the buttons, it's going to update, and I'm just going to select all, and I'm going to put smart indent and see how that fixes up all this. Okay, so it makes it look nice and clean. I just close this now, run my code again. So let's click that. Okay, so notice how it's doing this now. It's doing what I want it to do. So if I change that up, notice how there's no electric field coming in. Okay. Likewise, if I change it back, this is what we get, and this is what we want. Okay, so now it's doing what we want. And that's how you use the button group. So you set up the button group, you put your buttons in there, set the properties that you want, work out what exactly you want the button group to do. Okay, and it takes care of things like turning everything else off once you turn one of the buttons on. And to accommodate that, I've used the switch statement. Okay, so in the case where we select this one, we do some code. In the case where we select the other, we do some other code. Okay, and that's essentially how the button group works. I'll come back soon with one more video where we add a few tiny features to the plot, and hopefully that should finish up this example for you. Okay, thanks.